Robert's vast farm and a lifetime of brilliant inventions stand on the brink of being seized by a professional predator. If love can blur the lines of age and status, then those who wear its mask can easily deceive the most innocent hearts. As a sophisticated trap closes in, will the truth be exposed in time, and what will a father do to protect his only daughter? Stay with us to uncover this gripping story. And please, support our stories by subscribing to our channel. Chapter 1. An Unsettling Cadence. The sun was a heavy coin sinking into the tall grass of the Iowa plains. Everything was bathed in a thick amber glow, the kind of light that made the dust motes dancing in the air look like gold. On the porch of the old farmhouse, Robert sat in his weathered wooden chair. He was 67 years old. His hands were calloused and mapped with the scars of 1,000 machines. In his life, Robert had held many titles: husband, father, engineer. But mostly he was a man who listened to the world. He listened to the hum of a tractor engine to find a cracked piston. He listened to the whistle of the wind through the rafters to know if a storm was brewing. He lived by the rhythm of things. A gravelly crunch announced the arrival of a sleek black car. It looked out of place against the backdrop of rusted barns and rolling hills. Robert leaned forward. His heart gave a small, familiar thump of joy as the door opened. Grace stepped out. She looked like a vision of the city brought home. Her hair was styled in a way that spoke of Boston streets and university libraries. But her smile, that was still his Grace. "Dad!" she called out. Her voice carried across the yard like a bell. She was radiant. She was glowing with a kind of happiness Robert had prayed for every night since her mother passed. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. He was 38 years old, tall and impeccably dressed. His suit was charcoal gray. Not a single wrinkle disturbed the fabric. This was Sebastian, the soulmate, the man Grace had described in her long, excited phone calls from law school. Robert stood up slowly. His knees creaked a mechanical protest of time. He forced a welcoming smile onto his face. "You must be the legendary Robert," Sebastian said. He walked toward the porch with a stride that was fluid, too fluid. He extended a hand. The grip was firm. The skin was soft. It was the hand of a man who had never turned a wrench in his life. "It is an honor to finally meet the man who raised such an incredible woman," Sebastian added. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth, polished, like a piece of metal that had been buffed until it shone with an unnatural luster. "Welcome to the farm, Sebastian," Robert replied. "Grace has told me a lot about you." Robert guided them inside the house. The air smelled of cedar wood and the cinnamon rolls Grace loved. But as they sat in the living room, Robert felt a strange vibration in the air. An engineer knows when a machine is running too smoothly. If there is no friction, there is usually a lack of substance. Grace leaned against Sebastian on the sofa. She looked at him with eyes full of unfiltered devotion. "Sebastian has been so helpful, Dad," she said. "He is even helping me look over the legal paperwork for the estate. He wants to make sure everything is in order for us." Robert watched the man. Sebastian nodded. "Family is everything, Robert. We want to ensure that your legacy is protected, especially once the marriage is finalized." Robert leaned back. "The marriage," Robert repeated softly. "You both seem to be in quite a hurry." Sebastian smiled. It was a perfect curve of the lips, but his eyes stayed on the coffee table. "When you know," Sebastian said. He began to talk about their plans. He spoke of lawyers in Boston. He spoke of investment portfolios and property deeds. He spoke of the farm as if it were a line item on a balance sheet, and that was when Robert saw it. Sebastian reached out to touch a small silver clock on the side table. It was an heirloom. Robert's grandfather had brought it from the old country. Sebastian did not touch it with reverence. He did not run his fingers over the intricate carvings to appreciate the craft. His eyes narrowed slightly. He tilted his head as if checking the weight of the silver. He was appraising it, like a jeweler looking at a raw diamond. Robert felt a cold chill. It was a hitch in the rhythm, a subtle grinding sound in a gearbox that looked pristine on the outside. "Is everything all right, Dad?" Grace asked. She noticed his silence. Robert looked at his daughter. She was so full of hope, so full of light. He looked at Sebastian. The man was now looking out the window toward the north pasture, the pasture where the most valuable timber stood. "I am fine, Grace," Robert said. His voice was steady, but his mind was racing. He had no proof. He had no evidence, only the intuition of a man who had spent 67 years studying how things work. And right now, Sebastian did not work. He was a beautiful facade, a masterfully crafted engine with no heart. Sebastian turned back to the room. "This is a wonderful place, Robert. A lot of potential here." Robert nodded slowly. "Yes," the old man said, "but potential can be a dangerous thing if it falls into the wrong hands." Sebastian's smile did not falter, but he did not look Robert in the eye. He looked at the clock. Then, he looked at the door. The twilight was fading into deep purple. The crickets began their rhythmic chirping outside. Usually, this was the most peaceful hour of Robert's day. Tonight, the sound felt like a warning, like a heartbeat that was just slightly off. Robert watched them laugh together. He watched the way Sebastian's hand rested on Grace's shoulder. It looked like a gesture of affection, but to Robert, it looked like a claim. The engineer sat in silence. He would listen. He would observe. He would wait for the machine to reveal its true flaw, because every machine has a flaw, and Robert was the master of finding them. Chapter 2. The Rosy Mist of Boston. The city was a labyrinth of cold stone and humming electric lights. For a girl raised on the open plains of Iowa, Boston felt like a different planet. Grace arrived with 2 heavy suitcases and a heart full of nervous ambition. Everything was faster here. The people walked with a frantic purpose. The air tasted of salt from the harbor and exhaust from the endless stream of taxis. She was a country girl in a world of steel. Her eyes were wide. Her spirit was open. She was ready to change the world with the law. The university was a cathedral of knowledge, high ceilings, dusty libraries, the constant scent of old paper and expensive coffee. Grace threw herself into her studies. But the weekends often felt long and quiet in her small apartment, until the night of the gala. It was a fundraiser for a prominent legal foundation. Grace wore a simple navy dress she had bought back home. She felt small among the silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. The room was a blur of clinking champagne flutes and sophisticated laughter. She stood near a marble pillar, feeling like an outsider looking through a window. "The architecture is breathtaking, but the company is far too loud, don't you think?" The voice was like velvet. Grace turned to see a man standing beside her. He was older, handsome in a way that felt timeless. His eyes were dark and carried a gentle warmth that made her pulse quicken. "I am Sebastian," he said. He did not offer a flashy smile. He offered a look of genuine interest, as if in a room full of hundreds, she was the only one he truly saw. They talked for hours. He spoke of his travels to Paris and Rome. He spoke of art galleries and hidden bookstores. But mostly he asked about her. He listened to her stories about the farm. He laughed softly when she described her father's eccentric inventions. He called her perspective refreshing. He called her spirit rare. Grace felt a door opening to a world she had only read about in books. The following morning, a bouquet of lilies arrived at her door. The next day, it was a leather-bound edition of a rare law text. The gifts were not just expensive, they were thoughtful. They were targeted. Sebastian became a constant presence in her life. He would pick her up in a sleek car and take her to restaurants where the menus were in French. He bought her a silk scarf that felt like a cloud against her skin. "A woman like you deserves to be surrounded by beauty," he would whisper. Grace was overwhelmed. She had never known such devotion. Back home, romance was a slow dance at a county fair. This was a whirlwind. This was a symphony. She felt like she was floating in a rosy mist. The city no longer felt cold. The libraries no longer felt lonely. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart did a somersault. She was convinced, she was certain, she had found the one. As the weeks turned into months, the tone of their conversations began to shift. It was subtle at first, a gentle turn of a gear. "Grace, you have such a bright future," Sebastian said one evening over dinner. "But the world is a predatory place for a young lawyer with such an inheritance." He took her hand across the white linen cloth. "We must think about protecting what is yours. For our sake. For our children someday." He spoke of legal frameworks. He spoke of joint accounts and pre-nuptial protections that sounded like safety. To a law student, his logic seemed impeccable. To a girl in love, his concern felt like the ultimate form of care. He began to press for paperwork. "Let us secure our future now," he urged, "so we can focus purely on our love later." Then his interest turned toward the Iowa horizon. "Your father," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a respectful tone, "an engineer with so many patents, a man of such honor. I feel I cannot truly call you mine until I have shaken his hand." He spoke of Robert with a reverence that touched Grace deeply. He seemed desperate to see the farm. He was urgent. He was intense. "I want to see where you grew up, Grace. I want to walk the land that made you who you are." Grace leaned into him, feeling blessed. She didn't see the calculation in his eyes. She didn't hear the cold, metallic snap of a trap being set. She only saw the man of her dreams. She only saw a future that looked as bright as a polished diamond. "We will go soon, Sebastian," she promised. "My father will love you." Sebastian smiled. It was a look of quiet triumph. The rosy mist was thick. The world was beautiful. And the girl from the farm had no idea that the predator had finally found the trail. Chapter 3. A verdict on paper. The law library was a cathedral of hushed whispers and cold marble. Dust motes danced in the pale light of high windows. Row after row of leather-bound books stood like silent witnesses to centuries of human conflict. Grace sat at a long oak table. Her focus was buried in a stack of case files. She was a law student now. She was learning that justice was not always a feeling. Justice was a structure built on cold, hard evidence. This was the final phase of her internship project. The topic was marriage fraud and asset theft. It was a study of the shadows. The professor wanted them to understand how predators used the language of love to bypass the locks on a family estate. Her group was small. 3 students huddled around a glowing computer screen. They were dissecting the lives of ghosts. "Look at this pattern," one of her classmates whispered. He was a sharp boy named Marcus. He pointed to a digital spreadsheet. "There is a specific kind of predator. We call them the invisible thieves." Marcus scrolled through a list of names and dates. The data showed a string of cases across the East Coast. Young women from established families, wealthy fathers with significant holdings, industrialists, real estate moguls, and engineers with valuable patents. Grace felt a small, cold ripple in her stomach. She ignored it. She told herself it was just the air conditioning in the library. The group began to pull up police reports from a decade prior. They found a profile of a man who moved like a shadow through elite social circles. He never used the same name twice, but his methods were identical. He would find a woman who was bright but isolated in a new city. He would shower her with sophisticated attention. He would speak of art and philosophy, and then within months he would begin the legal process of merging their assets. "He targets the inheritance," Marcus said. His voice was clinical and detached. "He looks for the weak point in the family trust. Usually it is a daughter who is eager to prove she can handle the family business on her own." Grace stared at the screen. The description of the man's behavior began to feel like a mirror. The lavish gifts, the intense, urgent devotion, the sudden interest in legal paperwork to protect the future. Every detail felt like a heavy stone being placed on her chest. Then, Marcus pulled up an old photo from a suppressed court filing. It was grainy. The man in the picture was younger. His hair was a different color. But the way he stood, the way he tilted his head with a look of practiced humility, it was unmistakable. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands began to shake under the table. She quickly folded them into her lap. "This is just an exercise," she told herself. "These are just numbers on a screen." "Grace, are you okay?" Her other classmate leaned in. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Grace forced a laugh. The sound was hollow. It was the sound of a gear grinding against sand. "I am fine," she said. "It is just a lot of depressing information. I think we are looking for monsters where there are only coincidences." She stood up abruptly. Her chair made a sharp scraping sound against the marble floor. She couldn't stay there. The logic of the law was beginning to pierce through the rosy mist of her romance, and she wasn't ready to let go of the dream. She gathered the printed files and stuffed them into her leather briefcase. "I'll finish the summary at home," she lied. "I need some fresh air." She walked out of the library and into the crisp Boston evening. The city lights were bright. The streets were filled with people. She looked at her phone. There was a text from Sebastian, a poem, a promise of a quiet dinner, a heart emoji. She wanted to scream. She wanted to believe him. She looked back at the library doors. Inside those doors was the truth. Outside in the cool night air was the man who made her feel like a queen. "It is a lie," she whispered to herself. "The project is just a buy tap. It is meant to make us cynical. The professor wants us to be suspicious of everyone." She arrived at her apartment. She sat at her desk and looked at the briefcase. The files were inside. The evidence of a dark history. The allegations of stolen inheritances. The ruined lives of women who looked just like her. Grace opened a bottom drawer. She pushed the files deep into the back behind old textbooks and empty folders. She slammed the drawer shut. She wanted to bury the doubt. She wanted to hide the facts until they disappeared. "I will take him home," she decided. Her eyes were hard now. "I will bring him to the farm. I will show my father how happy I am, and when they meet, I will prove to everyone that Sebastian is a good man." She convinced herself that the fear was just a test of her love. She believed that if she could just get him to the farm, the truth of his devotion would shine through. She was blinded by a whirlwind. She was trapped in a rhythm of her own making. Grace picked up her phone and called Sebastian. "I want you to come home with me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing. "I want you to meet my father." On the other end of the line, Sebastian smiled. He spoke of how honored he would be. He spoke of how much he respected the legacy of an engineer. He spoke of their future. Grace hung up the phone. She looked at the closed drawer. The verdict was there, written on paper. But for now, the daughter was choosing to listen to the song instead of the warning. The trap was set. And Grace was the one leading the predator to the gate. Chapter 4. The Heavy Silence. The first night at the farmhouse was not filled with the warm laughter Grace had imagined. The air inside the dining room felt thick. It was like the heavy atmosphere before a summer storm. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was a steady mechanical heartbeat, a reminder that time was passing. Robert sat at the head of the long oak table. He moved slowly. He handled his silverware with the deliberate care of a man used to assembling delicate parts. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp. They were observant. Every time Sebastian spoke, Robert would pause. He would listen, but he would not nod. He would not offer the easy smile of a welcoming host. Grace sat between them. She pushed her peas around her plate. She felt a cold knot tightening in her stomach. "Dad, you've barely said a word," she said. Her voice sounded thin in the large room. "Aren't you happy we are all here together?" Robert looked up. He looked at his daughter with a gaze full of profound, quiet worry. It was the look he gave her when she was a child, and he caught her playing too close to a running engine. It was the look of a man who saw a danger she did not yet understand. "I am glad you are home, Grace," he said. His voice was low. He did not look at Sebastian when he said it. Sebastian cleared his throat. He was leaning back in his chair, trying to appear relaxed, but Grace noticed a slight tension in his shoulders. "Robert, I must say your farm is a remarkable feat of engineering," Sebastian said. He offered a practiced, charming smile. "The way you've managed the irrigation and the patent filings for the new machinery, it is truly impressive." Robert did not take the bait. He took a slow sip of water. "Land and machines are simple things, Sebastian," Robert replied. "They do not lie. They do not hide their true nature. If a gear is broken, it makes a sound. If a field is poisoned, the grass turns brown." The silence returned. It was heavier now. Grace felt torn. She wanted to defend Sebastian. She wanted to tell her father that he was being unfair. She wanted to shout about her loyalty and her love, but the deep-seated respect she had for her father's wisdom acted like a brake. She knew that her father didn't make mistakes about how things were built, and he was looking at Sebastian as if he were a machine with a fatal flaw. After dinner, the tension only shifted. It did not dissipate. Sebastian excused himself, saying he wanted to take a walk to see the moonlight on the fields. Robert stayed in the kitchen to clean the dishes. He moved with a quiet, patient rhythm. Grace followed him. "Dad, please," she whispered. "Just give him a chance." Robert stopped. He held a plate in his soapy hands. "I'm giving him exactly what he deserves." "Grace," he said softly, "I am giving him my silence. A man who is honest will find peace in silence. A man who is not, will find it unbearable." Outside, Sebastian was not walking toward the fields. He was lingering near the back of the house. He was standing near the entrance to the workshop. The workshop was the heart of the farm. It was where the original blueprints were kept. It was where the gold seals of the patent certificates were displayed in glass cabinets. Grace watched from the kitchen window. She saw Sebastian through the glass. He wasn't looking at the moonlight. He was peering through the workshop window. He was leaning in close. His face was illuminated by a stray beam of light. The charm was gone. The polished grace had vanished. In its place was a look of pure, cold greed. His eyes were darting from one certificate to another. He looked like a man counting money that was not his. Robert was standing right behind her. He saw it too. He caught the glimpse of the predator in his natural state. Robert didn't say a word. He just breathed in a slow and heavy sound. That silence did what 1,000 lectures could not do. It forced Grace to slow down. The rosy mist in her mind began to thin. She felt a cold clarity wash over her. Suddenly, she wasn't just a girl in love. She was a law student, a woman trained to look at evidence, a woman trained to spot a lie. She looked at Sebastian again. She saw the way his hands moved over the window frame. She saw the calculation in his posture. She remembered the grainy photos from the library. She remembered the patterns of the invisible thieves. The gears in her own mind began to turn. They were moving with the same precision her father had taught her. Robert placed a dry hand on her shoulder. "The rhythm is off, Grace," he whispered. "Can you hear it now?" Grace did not answer, but she didn't look away. She watched the man who had promised her the world. And for the first time, she saw the cage he was building around her. The night was quiet, but for Grace the silence was now a deafening warning. Chapter 5. When the veil is torn. The house was breathing. The old wood groaned as the temperature dropped in the dead of night. Grace lay in her childhood bed. The ceiling was a map of familiar shadows, but sleep would not come. Her mind was a whirlwind of disconnected images. The warm smile of her father, the cold eyes of Sebastian near the workshop, the grainy photos in the law library. She sat up. The air in the room felt stagnant. She needed water. She needed to walk. She slipped out of her room and moved down the hallway with silent feet. The farmhouse was dark, except for a sliver of light beneath the door of her father's private library. Grace froze. Her father was an early riser. He never stayed up this late. She moved closer. Her heart was a drum beating against her ribs. She reached for the handle. She pushed the door open just an inch. Sebastian was there. He was not the charming gentleman from Boston anymore. He had his phone out. The screen was a bright clinical white against the darkness. He was standing over her father's desk. With a cold and steady hand, he was leafing through a leather portfolio. Grace saw the blue paper of the patent blueprints. She saw the thick cream-colored land deeds. Flash. The camera on his phone flickered. Flash. He was documenting everything. His face was tight with focus. There was no love in that expression. There was only the hunger of a scavenger. In that moment, the veil did not just slide away. It was torn. The images from her internship project rushed back. They arrived with the force of a tidal wave. The invisible thieves, the predators who specialized in the long game. The case files she had buried in her drawer at school began to scream in her mind. Everything fit. The way he had isolated her from her friends, the way he had insisted on seeing the honorable engineer, the urgent pressure to sign legal documents before the wedding. It was a modus operandi. It was a script, and she had been the lead actress in a play she didn't know was a tragedy. Grace stepped back into the shadows of the hallway. Her legs felt like they were made of water. The realization shattered her heart into 1,000 pieces. He had never loved her. He had never seen her. He only saw the dollar signs attached to her father's life work. He only saw the soil of the farm and the genius of the patents. She was just the key to the vault. A wave of nausea washed over her, but right behind the pain came something else. Regret. It was heavy and bitter. She thought of Robert's silent observation at the dinner table. She thought of the way he had looked at her with quiet worry. He had seen the flaw. He had heard the rattle in the engine from the very first moment, and she had called him unfair. She had chosen the polished lie over the rugged truth. Grace leaned against the wall. The cold wood felt like the only real thing left in the world. She watched the light under the door flicker again. The predator was still there. He was still stealing their history. She wanted to run into the room and scream. She wanted to strike him. But the law student in her took a breath. She knew that anger was a weapon that could be turned against her. She needed a plan. She needed evidence. She needed to be as precise as a machine. She looked down at her own hands. They were no longer shaking. The rosy mist was gone. The world was sharp and cold and clear. Grace turned away from the light. She walked back toward her father's room. She didn't need to find the truth anymore. She was living it. Her father had been the silent alarm. And finally, Grace was wide awake. Chapter 6. The Heart's Homecoming. The dawn arrived with a thin strip of violet light over the eastern fields. The air was biting and cold. Grace did not wait for the sun to fully rise. She walked across the dew-covered grass toward the old workshop. A soft yellow glow spilled from the small windows. Her father was already there. He was always there when the world was quiet. She pushed the heavy wooden door open. The smell of oil and aged cedar enveloped her. Robert was standing at his workbench. He was cleaning a set of brass calipers with a soft cloth. He did not look surprised to see her. He simply stopped his work and waited. Grace tried to speak, but her voice broke. The weight of the night before came crashing down on her shoulders. She ran to him. She threw her arms around his sturdy frame and wept. She cried for the time she had wasted. She cried for the blindness of her own heart. She sobbed into the worn flannel of his shirt. "I am so sorry, Dad," she whispered through her tears. "I saw him. I saw what he was doing in the library. You were right. You were right from the very first second." Robert did not pull away. He held her with the strength of a man who had weathered 1,000 storms. He let her pour out her remorse. She told him about the files at the university. She told him about the photos Sebastian had taken in the dark. She told him how ashamed she felt for leading a predator to their door. Finally, the sobbing slowed. Robert pulled back slightly and took her hands in his. His grip was firm, unshakable. "Grace, look at me," he said. His voice was calm. There was not a single drop of anger in his tone. "I'm not hurt. The farm is still standing." "But I almost lost everything for us," she cried. Robert smiled. It was a tired but beautiful expression. "Grace, I spent my life working with iron and steel. I know that even the strongest parts can bend under pressure. Machines can be fixed, and so can a family." He squeezed her hand. "The only thing that matters is that you are back. The real Grace is back." The sun began to climb higher. The workshop grew brighter. The time for tears was over. It was time for the engineer and the lawyer to work together. Grace wiped her eyes. Her mind became sharp again. She utilized her legal training to explain their next steps. They did not need a loud scene. They did not need a dramatic fight. In the world of the law, silence and evidence were the most powerful weapons. They worked quickly. Grace helped her father secure the digital logs of the workshop security system. They documented the unauthorized access to the private files. She drafted a formal cease and desist order based on the theft of trade secrets. She gathered the evidence from her university project to show Sebastian that his past had finally caught up with him. When Sebastian finally walked out of the house looking for Grace with a practiced smile, he found them both waiting on the porch. Robert sat in his chair. Grace stood beside him. She held a single manila folder in her hand. Sebastian started to speak. He started to weave another web of charming lies. Grace simply handed him the folder. "We know who you are, Sebastian," she said. Her voice was like ice. "We know about the other families, and we have the evidence of what you did in the library last night." The charm drained out of his face. For a moment, the predator looked small. He looked at the documents. He looked at the quiet, steady gaze of the old engineer. He realized he was no longer dealing with a girl in a rosy mist. He was dealing with a fortress. There were no shouts. There was no swearing. Just the quiet power of the truth. Grace gave him one choice. Leave now. Leave and never return to this state, or face the full weight of a criminal prosecution for industrial espionage. Sebastian did not argue. He knew when the game was lost. He turned and walked toward his car without a word. The gravel crunched under his tires one last time. The black car disappeared down the long driveway. It grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck on the horizon. Then it was gone. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. The birds began to sing in the apple trees. The wind whispered through the tall corn. Robert stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. Grace joined him. They watched the sunrise turn the world into a masterpiece of gold and green. She leaned her head on his shoulder. The bond between them was deeper than it had ever been. It was a bond forged in fire and polished by the truth. The farm was safe. The legacy was secure. And as the light filled the valley, Grace knew she was finally home, truly, deeply home. In this life, the most valuable things we own cannot be stolen by a clever hand or a polished lie. True legacy is found in the quiet wisdom of those who love us and the courage to open our eyes to the truth. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to walk this journey with us by joining our small community. Your support through a simple like or by sharing your own thoughts in the comments helps these stories reach more souls who need them. Please subscribe to stay with us for more tales of the heart, and do not forget to click the video on your screen to see our latest story. Thank you for being a part of our family today.